Hello and welcome to a very special horror hangout, bite-sized, or bite-size, with or without a D, it's fine. Um, Once again, exclusively for our Patreon members, thank you for all the support you guys give to the show. Um, I wanted to do a little bit of a special series when it comes to bite-sized episodes. It's not what I'm going to be doing exclusively. Like Ben and anyone else that records them will also be doing films that we haven't covered in a main feed episode, perhaps films that we never will, perhaps films that we will do in the future. But I'm in a unique position where, for those of you who've been listening for a while, you will know that I didn't join the Horror Hangout team from the very beginning. I made my first appearance as a guest in the low 20s when I came to join the guys to talk about It Follows, and appeared as a guest at various points from then on, sometimes several weeks in a row, then months without appearing, until I became a permanent fixture in 2021-ish, I believe, when I stopped appearing without breaks in between as just a regular co-host. So what that does mean is that there are a large number of episodes from the series past that I wasn't on, and perish the thought you ever don't hear enough of me talking. So I thought what I'd do is, in part of this short series, I would go back, and while I won't recap the plot points or all the items that Luke, Ben, and various other guests covered over when they did full episodes on them, I will give a couple of my thoughts on performances, on some of the themes, and my quick review. So for anyone keeping track of these things, by which I primarily mean myself, um, we'll be able to get scores for all of the movies across all of the people who are on the episodes at the time, and I can make sure we've got 3 votes on each one. So the film I'm covering first is one that I was unable to attend quite recently because of some work commitments, but I did watch the film in preparation. So never one to waste watching a film, an activity people do for leisure, and not make content out of it. I thought the first one I would cover with you here is 1981's Possession. Um, it was a film I was very much looking forward to covering on the podcast, having heard members of the horror community and some of our former guests talk about it very effusively on their podcast. So I think you'll hear a good episode from Amber Hornblood Fire. Her podcast, you can hear them talk about that with a guest in great detail. They have a great appreciation for the movie. I believe it's one of her favorites. Even having listened to some podcasts and some discussion about it before I saw it, I don't think I was fully prepared for what I was going to get from Possession. Its surrealism and the tone of it almost feels shallow in some cases, but it has that kind of Soviet darkness and cold, sort of Cold War era movies, and the setting of, I believe it's in East Germany. It has that kind of real starkness about it, which kind of takes it out of that genre, even though it has those mystery and the gore elements and the surrealism and the dreamlike qualities that sometimes you'll see from a giallo movie, but it's never claimed to be one, so I don't need to debunk that. One of the things I'm really coming to terms with is beloved childhood hero, who I assumed was a nice man growing up, Sam Neill, Dr. Alan Grant, before he was a gruff sort of father figure. Apparently he was bad blokes in films all the time. So long before I thought his reputation had been tarnished by Dr. Weir, the insane scientist in Event Horizon. He had been grown-up Damien in The Omen 3. He had been, well, he'd been in this. He'd been quite an abusive partner and a surreal horror man here in Possession. And for this film's foibles, he does it very well. He's quite menacing a number of occasions. He certainly appears unhinged in a number of the scenes too, particularly him rocking violently back and forth in the lowest slung rocking chair I have certainly ever encountered. He is full Weeble mode on this one. Like, it looks like he's almost tipping to 90 degrees in some points, but thankfully, much like his Weeble ancestors, regardless of how much he wobbles or rocks, he does not fall down. His sanity, however, does take a severe knocking. And so as he goes through the course of the movie, investigating his wife, very quickly estranged wife in the opening scenes of the movie, her bizarre behavior, played by Isabelle Adjani, or Adjani. Her behavior is erratic, sometimes violent, sometimes deeply upset, and sometimes deeply victimized by her sort of controlling and possessive, I guess another meaning for the film's title, husband, who isn't willing to let their relationship go, and hires investigators to see what's happening and to investigate the mysteries of her actions and what's going on with her. Other performances you cannot look past. The lover character played by an actor called Heinz Bennett, excellent name. It turns out that in the film, Anna has been having an affair, but while Mark has been away on what we later learn is spy work, or what is implied is spy work across the German border, we imagine. Heinrich, her lover that she's taken while he's away, and is a very over-the-top, flamboyant character who almost dances and sings his way through his lines. A very dance-like fight in Heinrich's apartment happens later. Later on, we see him just dancing up and through the stairs of Mark's apartment. Very, very surreal. Their sort of forced allyship as they both come together and both become more disturbed by Anna's behavior is a really, really bizarre thing to see on screen. Almost comedic in tone when you see his physicality on the screen, but set against this dark foreboding. And by the time you've got like a tentacle monster which is alleged to be having sex with our main character, it really feels like a really big tonal shift to be able to put those things together. Looking at the themes of the film, I think there's a lot of things you can interpret from it. Certain things I can absolutely see. Obviously, there is the story of Anna talking about having a violent miscarriage, the one that she reenacts, smashing milk and yogurt all over the subway walls later on. Obviously, there's an act of trauma, of violence, of a very harrowing time that's happened, and how that links into a demon story. I certainly don't have the ability to read films to understand how those directly relate, or whether it is just a more straightforward story of horror placed on top of that metaphor later on. But it's not the only one that certainly is easy to pick out from the film. I say easy. I don't think it's very easy to pick out a lot of things from this film. I think it can be quite abstract at some points. But we clearly see the abusiveness of that relationship from both parties, the emotional abuse, the physical abuse, the controlling behaviors that exist from all of them, and overlooking the fact that they have a son in the middle of this as well, a young son who they both seem to care for, but at various points of the film is neglected or left with another person, even if that other person is Helen, an exact copy of Anne with different colored eyes, and works at a school. And the doppelganger characters we see, be it Helen or be it the ultimate evil version of Sam Neill, of Mark, that arises at the end of the film, maybe a feel of idealism, wanting to create through sometimes pleasant, sometimes unpleasant methods, the ideal version of the partner that you have. And then again, political sensitivities at the time. I took a moment to pause, especially with the West-East German setting, the origins of the director, and then you'd imagine a lot more of the creative team behind the film as well. And its release period in the early 1980s. It's going to be the height of the Cold War that was taking place right then. Tensions would have still been high, and it's an era of espionage and so on as well, right? So the fear of the other, the person that is just like you but stands for the absolute opposite in terms of their societal values and their morals. So potentially there's an angle to play there as well, particularly when you look at Mark's character's profession. And, you know, when we get to the end, when this evil version of him, this identical but ideologically opposite version, which calmly steps out over the original Mark's dead body, coerces someone into, well, persuades someone with a look at their eyes to cover for him while he escapes from the police and the armed services, and then returns to his home to look at the idealized version of, well, now Helen in the face through the peephole, while their son, potentially representing their future, nopes out as hard as I've ever seen a kid nope out in something, and chooses to basically face plant into the bath and I guess at least visibly drown himself. Um, a really, really unusual film as it all comes together, but does that speak to the ideological shift and what it could mean to our future and our countries? Um, Definitely worth looking at some actual academia on this if that's something that interests you, not just my ramblings, which I can confirm. I have looked up zero essays to actually confirm if others more educated than me in the subject of film, by which I mean at all, have commented on. But it became especially prevalent for me when I hear like almost the apocalyptic sounds of warplanes and bombs and heavy gunfire happening as we see Helen looking out through that peephole at the end. A real scattershot approach to the plot elements and themes there. I would recommend going back and listening to the episode in full. That if that takes your fancy. My review, as it came down to it, I think it's an interesting film. I definitely think it has its merits, and I think it has some interesting themes that are worth exploring. Tonally, it didn't necessarily work for me. I would have liked it to perhaps have been one way or the other. Perhaps I could have had some confirmation of the metaphorical nature of the story, or perhaps just a little bit more background or confirmation of the creature, the demonic entity that, you know, begins and, you know, goes from a stain to some strings to some almost tendril-like creature, like a tentacly-like creature, going on to finally end up as, you know, a human replica, but still monstrous in its intent. Yeah, it's interesting. It has good themings. It has some visuals. It has some disturbing visuals in there, but tonally, the way some of the performances go and the way sometimes scenes will barrel into one another, time will pass between angle changes almost, and some of the surrealist moments took me out of it a little bit. I think my brain was trying to work out what was going on and was convinced I'd missed something that took me out of trying to follow the actual story. And it is something that perhaps I'll pick up with subsequent watches. I can see both sides of it. I can see why this film wasn't particularly strongly reviewed when it came out, but I can also absolutely see how it gained a cult following years later. Know a number of members of the horror community that would list this in their top movies right now. So do check it out. Your mileage may vary, or if you listen to the full episode, you know everything about it. Why bother? My review, though, overall, I would give Possession a. Now, I've just did this on Letterboxd. Can I convert it to classic horror hangout rating? Normally, I'd have Ben to lean on here and give me some inspiration. I'm going to go with a C plus on this one, I think. Maybe if I wasn't tired late in the evening, it would have been a B minus. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff here. A little bit incoherent for my personal tastes on some occasions, but there's something to enjoy here, and there's definitely some unique visuals to engage with. Will I necessarily go out to catch up with more people having sex in dilapidated buildings on mattresses with tentacle semi-developed versions of their husbands? Maybe not. Maybe that's based on availability. Maybe that's based on what's to be watched for enjoyment versus an appreciation of cinema and themes. But yeah, there's some interesting filmmaking on display here. So depending on your level of interest, you might be worth checking out. Right, that was a quick bite-sized piece. That's me with an official score on the record for Possession. Look out for more of these. Not all surreal, but I've got lots of films to catch up on, as well as continuing to do other bite-sized content. I do also want to do some other bite-sized content as well, where we look at maybe some cheeky short-form top tens or a little bit of a horror discussion. So look out for some more of that coming soon. But for now, thank you very much for being on Patreon. You do give us a little smile and help us spend money in the background on doing things to the podcast, whether that's little things like renting movies that you can't get on a streaming service, or whether it's doing some travel when we do some on-site sessions when we might get to do some more festival stuff later this year. It is really appreciated. It helps us put more money into the podcast without, in this economy, having no money to live our lives and pay our bills and stuff. So thank you very much for all you do. Keep on listening. If you've got any films you would like us to cover or one of us to cover as part of a bite-sized episode, these are just for you. Your voices count more than they do any other time when you're competing with everyone else who listens on the public feed. You want something out there? Shoot one of us a message. We'll get straight on it. For now, though, goodbye.